This is a true story, and the HOA has long been a thorn in the side of the residents. Here's the full story.
Buying this condo was supposed to be the culmination of years of hard work, a step up into a life of quiet comfort and sophistication. I'd pored over listings, navigated bidding wars, and finally landed on this place. It wasn't just an apartment. It was a unit in a sleek, modern tower overlooking the city, with floor-to-ceiling windows, gleaming hardwood floors, and access to a rooftop pool and a state-of-the-art gym. The price tag, well over $700,000, felt astronomical, a dizzying sum that promised not just ownership, but a certain quality of life. A life free from the hassles of leaky roofs, lawn maintenance, and, I naively thought, petty disputes. The building was managed by a homeowners association, of course. All condos are. I'd skimmed the hefty packet of rules and regulations during the closing process. Most of it seemed standard, quiet hours, garbage disposal protocols, guidelines for using the common areas. There was a section on pets. Dogs and cats were allowed, with breed and size restrictions. Birds were okay, as long as they weren't excessively noisy. I remembered seeing a line about exotic animals and reptiles being prohibited, but it was buried deep in the text, and honestly, it barely registered. I wasn't planning on getting a tiger or an alligator. My pet was small, quiet, and lived entirely within its own climate-controlled ecosystem. My pet was Sir Scalesby, a beautiful, docile ball python. He wasn't a recent acquisition. I'd had him for several years, long before I ever dreamed of living in a high-rise condo. He was my quiet companion. He required specific care, maintaining his tank's temperature and humidity, offering him a thawed rodent every week or two, but in return, he offered a unique, calming presence. He wasn't demanding like a dog, didn't yowl like some cats, and certainly didn't squawk like a bird. He spent his days coiled comfortably in his hide, or sometimes exploring his carefully decorated tank amongst the branches and substrate. He was silent, contained, and utterly harmless. His entire world was a meticulously managed glass enclosure that took up maybe 4 square feet of my living room. No one outside my unit would ever know he existed. He couldn't damage the walls, chew the furniture, accept what was in his tank, shed fur on common area carpets, or bark at the neighbors. In my mind, he was the perfect condo pet. Living with Sir Scalesby in a new condo felt peaceful. After the chaos of moving, settling into the space with him there, a constant, silent presence, was deeply comforting. I'd set up his tank in a corner, away from direct sunlight, surrounded by bookshelves and plants. It blended into the decor, a small, self-contained habitat in my urban sanctuary. The city hummed far below, visible but muted through the thick glass. Inside, it was quiet, controlled, and felt entirely my own. For the first few months, life was exactly what I'd hoped for. The building was quiet, the neighbors I met seemed friendly enough, and the amenities were fantastic. I'd occasionally see dogs being walked in the designated pet area outside, hear a faint meow from a nearby unit, but nothing that caused any disturbance. The HOA seemed invisible, just quietly maintaining the building, collecting dues, handling the mundane necessities of shared living. The section in the rules about reptiles remained a forgotten footnote, a bureaucratic absurdity that had no bearing on my reality. Then came the first sign that my peaceful sanctuary was under observation, that the unblinking eye of bureaucracy was beginning to turn its gaze towards my quiet corner. It started subtly. A generic email from the HOA management company, addressed to all residents, reminding everyone of the importance of reviewing the pet policy and ensuring full compliance. It was vague, easily dismissed as a general notice. But a few weeks later, a note appeared on my door. Not on my mailbox, but taped directly to my door. It was a small, official-looking slip referencing a potential violation regarding the pet policy and requesting that I contact the HOA office. There was no mention of reptiles or Sir Scalesby, just the ominous phrase potential violation. Anxiety, cold and sharp, pierced my sense of security. How could they know? No one had seen him. He never left the tank. Had someone seen the box my frozen rodents were delivered in? Had a friend mentioned him? The feeling of being watched, of my private life potentially being exposed and scrutinized, was deeply unsettling. I called the HOA office the next day. The woman on the phone was polite but guarded. I asked about the note. Could you specify the nature of the potential violation? I asked, trying to keep my voice neutral. She put me on hold. When she came back, her tone had shifted, becoming slightly stiffer. Yes, Mr./Ms., my last name, she said. It pertains to an unauthorized animal unit within your residence. Still vague. Could you clarify what kind of animal? I have a pet, a ball python, securely housed in a tank. There was a pause, a significant pause. Then, her voice dropping slightly, she said, I understand. This matter has been referred to the Architectural Review Committee, specifically to Ms. Albright. Ms. Albright. The name clicked. I had seen her at a brief, awkward welcome meeting for new residents. A woman with severely pulled back hair, sharp eyes behind severe glasses, and a perpetual expression of mild disapproval. She was known, even among the few residents I'd spoken to, as being particularly diligent in her enforcement of rules, especially those concerning aesthetics and perceived order. The building Grapevine had already dubbed her HOA Karen, a moniker I now understood with chilling clarity. My attempt at polite inquiry had only served to confirm their suspicion and, worse, hand the matter directly to the building's resident enforcer. This was no longer a vague warning. It was specific. They knew about Sir Scalesby. A few days later, a formal letter arrived via certified mail. It was stark, cold, and utterly devoid of neighborly goodwill. On HOA letterhead, signed by Ms. Albright, Chair Arc, it stated unequivocally that I was in violation of Section 3B.7 of the HOA Covenants, Conditions and Restrictions CC and RS, which prohibited reptiles, amphibians, and other cold-blooded animals within units. It demanded immediate removal of the animal within 7 days. Failure to comply would result in a fine of $100 per day, retroactive to the date of the warning notice, and potential legal action, including forced removal or foreclosure proceedings. That last part felt like a cartoonishly evil threat, but seeing it in black and white sent a shiver down my spine. $100 a day. For a creature that harmed nothing, bothered no one, and lived its quiet life in a box. The absurdity of it fueled my disbelief, which quickly morphed into anger. This wasn't about damage or disturbance. It felt personal, arbitrary, an overreach of authority based on prejudice or a rigid adherence to an outdated, poorly thought-out rule. I spent the next few days buried in the condo documents, cross-referencing, highlighting, trying to find a loophole, a defense. I found the clause again. Reptiles, amphibians, and other cold-blooded animals are prohibited. No explanation why. No distinction between a contained, harmless snake and, say, a monitor lizard that could potentially be destructive. Meanwhile, the documents detailed acceptable dog breeds and weight limits. So, a large, barking dog potentially causing noise complaints and needing walks in common areas was fine, but a silent, tank-bound snake was forbidden? It made no logical sense. The rule felt arbitrary and discriminatory. I drafted a carefully worded email to Ms. Albright and the rest of the board, CCING, the management company. I explained politely but firmly that Sir Scalesby was a non-venomous ball python, completely contained within a secure, escape-proof habitat. I highlighted his quiet nature, the lack of any risk or disturbance he posed. I respectfully questioned the rationale behind the rule, contrasting it with the allowance of dogs and cats, which inherently posed a higher risk of noise, allergies, or common area issues. I requested reconsideration, or at the very least, a dialogue about a reasonable accommodation given the nature of the pet and its housing. The response was swift and dismissive. A terse email from Ms. Albright. The rule is clear. Section 3.B.7. Compliance is mandatory. Dialogue is not necessary. The deadline stands. Dialogue is not necessary. The sheer arrogance of it was staggering. I wasn't dealing with reasonable people. I was dealing with someone who saw rules not as guidelines for harmonious living, but as instruments of control, wielded without exception or empathy. The stress began to consume me. Every time my phone pinged, I dreaded it was an email from the management company. Every knock on the door sent my heart racing. I started keeping the blinds closed, irrationally worried that someone with binoculars might be peering into my windows, searching for signs of the forbidden reptile. The sanctuary I'd bought and paid for was becoming a cage of anxiety. I worried constantly about Sir Scalesby, not his well-being, which was perfectly fine, but his future. The thought of having to rehome him, to give up my quiet, harmless friend because of a bureaucratic power trip, was heartbreaking. 7 days passed. The deadline came and went. I didn't remove Sir Scalesby. I couldn't. I wouldn't. Not for this. The fine started. The first one arrived by email. $100, violation, unauthorized animal unit, reptile. The next day, another $100. And the next. Each email felt like a little jab, a constant reminder that I was being targeted, penalized for something that literally affected no one but me. The pile of virtual fines grew, a phantom debt accumulating with terrifying speed. Then came the face-to-face confrontation. I was getting off the elevator in the lobby one evening when Ms. Albright was getting on. She stopped, blocking my path, clipboard, of course, the clipboard clutched in her hand. Her sharp eyes fixed on me, unblinking, like Sir Scalesby's, but cold and judgmental. Mr./Ms., my last name, she stated, her voice low but carrying that same unyielding tone from her emails. I note that the unauthorized animal has not been removed. The fines are accumulating. Ms. Albright, I replied, trying to stay calm. As I stated in my email, the rule is unfair and, I believe, improperly applied. My pet is harmless and contained. It poses no risk or disturbance. Dogs, which are allowed, inherently pose greater potential issues. She stiffened, her lips pressing into a thin line. The rules apply equally to all residents. Section 3.B.7 is clear. There are no exceptions based on the type of reptile or its housing. Rules are rules, Mr./Ms., my last name. They are not suggestions. Your failure to comply is a clear violation. You are jeopardizing your residency. Jeopardizing my residency? I repeated, the stress and frustration finally starting to crack my composure. For owning a snake in a tank, in a unit I paid over $700,000 for? A snake that is quieter and cleaner than half the dogs in this building. Other residents are concerned, she added, though I had heard nothing from any neighbors directly. It felt like a fabrication, a justification for her own agenda. People are uncomfortable with snakes. It is for the peace of mind of the community. My pet in my private unit, unseen and unheard, is disturbing the peace of mind of the community? I challenged, my voice rising slightly. Or is it simply disturbing your peace of mind, Ms. Albright? Her face flushed slightly, but her gaze remained hard. The rules will be enforced, Mr./Ms., my last name. You have two options: remove the animal or continue to incur fines and face escalated legal action. The choice is yours. But be aware, the HOA is prepared to pursue this to the fullest extent necessary. She stepped past me into the elevator, leaving me standing there, trembling slightly with anger and fear. The fines weren't just arbitrary. They felt personal now. This was a battle of wills, and Ms. Albright was clearly relishing the fight. The night of the HOA board meeting arrived. I dressed carefully, wanted to look serious and respectable, not like a rebellious rule breaker. I carry my binder full of documents like shield. The meeting room in the building's common area was sparsely filled. The 5 board members sat at a long table. Ms. Albright was among them, of course, her face impassive, eyes fixed forward. A few residents were scattered in the chairs facing the board. The Millers, Eleanor, the tech guy, and a couple of other faces I recognized who gave me small, encouraging nods. Ms. Albright had sent out a general agenda, but hadn't specifically highlighted the pet violation hearing, perhaps hoping for a small audience. After reviewing the previous month's minutes and discussing routine building maintenance, the chair of the board, a seemingly weary man named Mr. Davison, announced, "Next, we have a scheduled hearing with resident, my unit number, regarding a compliance matter." My heart pounded. I walked to the front, setting my binder on the small table provided. I took a deep breath and began. I introduced myself and Sir Scalesby, describing him not as a scary reptile, but as a beloved, harmless pet. I explained his contained habitat, emphasizing that he posed no noise, health, or safety risk to anyone in the building. I presented the photos of his secure tank. Then, I laid out my case. I acknowledged the rule in Section 3.B.7, but argued its arbitrary nature. I pointed to the allowance of dogs and cats, presenting printed pages from the CC and RS detailing their permitted presence despite the inherent potential for noise, allergies, and common area issues. I respectfully questioned the logic. How could a contained, silent animal be prohibited while a potentially disruptive or allergenic one was permitted? I referenced the daily fines, highlighting the financial strain and the feeling of being targeted. I mentioned my attempts to communicate and reach a reasonable understanding, which were shut down. I then presented my research, cautiously stating that legal precedent often disfavored HOA rules that were arbitrary, inconsistently enforced, or failed to serve a legitimate purpose related to the health, safety, or welfare of the community. I didn't explicitly threaten a lawsuit, but the implication hung in the air. Finally, I appealed to their sense of fairness and community. Was this rigid adherence to a potentially flawed rule truly beneficial to the building? Was alienating a quiet, responsible resident over a harmless pet truly in the HOA's best interest? When I finished, there was a silence. Mr. Davison nodded slowly. Thank you, my last name. We appreciate you presenting your perspective. Ms. Albright, do you have anything to add? Ms. Albright sat up straighter, her gaze sharper than ever. The rule is explicit, she stated, her voice cutting through the room. Section 3.B.7 prohibits reptiles. Period. The risks, while maybe perceived differently by the resident, exist. Potential escape, although claimed secure, is a possibility. Other residents have expressed discomfort. Rules are established for a reason, for the collective good. Allowing exceptions undermines the entire framework of the CC and RS. My recommendation is strict enforcement and continuation of fines until compliance is achieved. She spoke with unwavering conviction, portraying herself as the sole defender of order against my presumed chaos. But her reference to vague risks and unsubstantiated discomfort felt weaker after my presentation of facts and photos. Then, the unexpected happened. Eleanor, bless her heart, raised her hand. Mr. Davison gestured for her to speak. Mr. Davison, board members, Eleanor said, her voice clear despite a slight tremor. I've lived here for 7 years. I have a small dog. He barks sometimes. I see other dogs barking. I've never seen Mr./Ms., my last name, S. snake or heard it. It lives in a tank. My friend in 14B has a fish tank bigger than most people's bathtubs. Is that an unauthorized aquatic habitat? Where do we draw the line on what makes people uncomfortable? This feels less about community safety and more about one person's dislike. The fines seem excessive. The tech guy also spoke up, referencing his bike incident and others he knew about. He didn't defend the snake, but he questioned Ms. Albright's pattern of stringent, often seemingly arbitrary, enforcement. The board members exchanged glances. They weren't a monolith like Ms. Albright. They had different perspectives and likely didn't enjoy the ongoing tension. The weight of the mounting fines, the potential legal challenge I hinted at, and the unexpected resident support seemed to sway them. Mr. Davison cleared his throat. Thank you, residents. The board has heard the arguments. This is a complex matter involving an older rule and modern pet ownership practices. While the rule is currently in the CC and RS as written, the board needs to consider the aspects of enforcement, potential for nuisance, and consistency with other pet allowances. We will take this under advisement. Regarding the outstanding fines. He paused, looking at Ms. Albright, who looked ready to object. Given that this rule is under review and the resident has requested a hearing, the board votes to suspend the accumulation of fines, pending a full review of Section 3.B.7 and its application. A decision on the existing fines and the rule itself will be made at the next board meeting. It wasn't total victory yet, but it was a massive step. Suspension of fines meant the bleeding stopped. Reviewing the rule meant acknowledging its potential flaws. And Ms. Albright had been publicly, albeit politely, overruled by the board. Walking out of that meeting felt like shedding a heavy cloak. The immediate threat was gone. Ms. Albright shot me a glare, but she didn't approach. The neighbors who had spoken up gave me quiet smiles. At the next board meeting, the decision was made. The board voted to amend Section 3.b.7. While a blanket "no snakes" might be hard to fully overturn without a community-wide vote to change the CC and RS, they added a clause allowing properly and securely contained non-venomous reptiles and amphibians that pose no threat of noise, odor, or damage, subject to board approval based on specific pet and enclosure. My existing, perfectly contained ball python, Sir Scalesby, was explicitly deemed approved under the new clarification. The existing fines levied against me were rescinded. Ms. Albright remained on the board, but her influence, particularly regarding petty enforcement, seemed diminished. The community had seen her pushback, the board's intervention, and a successful challenge by a resident. Coming home that night after the final decision, I went straight to Sir Scalesby's tank. He was coiled peacefully in his hide, oblivious to the bureaucratic storm he had inadvertently caused. I tapped softly on the glass, a wave of relief washing over me. He was safe. He could stay. My sanctuary remained intact. The daily fine notices stopped. The anxiety that had gripped me for months began to recede. Life in the condo returned to normal, or a new kind of normal. I still saw Ms. Albright occasionally. She still had her clipboard, still seemed to patrol, but her unblinking gaze no longer felt directed solely at me. She found other battles, other rules to champion, but her campaign against Sir Scalesby was definitively over. The experience had been stressful, frustrating, and at times, terrifying. It had pitted me, a quiet resident who just wanted to live peacefully with his pet, against a rigid system and a determined individual wielding its rules like weapons. But it had also shown me the power of standing up for yourself, of researching your rights, and of finding allies in unexpected places. It wasn't just about a snake or a rule. It was about the principle of fairness, about challenging arbitrary authority, and about the fundamental right to feel secure and at peace in your own home, especially one you've paid a premium for. The condo building still stands, sleek and modern. The rules are still there, perhaps now slightly more nuanced regarding cold-blooded residents. And Sir Scalesby still lives in his tank, a quiet, contained inhabitant, an unwitting symbol of a small, hard-fought victory. To anyone facing similar petty tyrannies in their community, remember this. The rules are powerful, yes, but they are not always absolute or unchallengeable. Know your rights, question what feels unfair, gather your evidence, and don't be afraid to speak up. You might just find that the unblinking eye of bureaucracy can be blinked away, and that an ordinary person, standing firm on principle, is harder to defeat than any rulebook might suggest. Your home, your peace, and even your perfectly harmless pet are worth fighting for.